All right, everyone. Yesterday, a Reagan-era federal judge actually took a look at the Mueller case, looking into the probe, and said, you're going to need to give some of your sealed materials over to the court. Mueller doesn't want to do that, but I think they've been given 15 days to give the sealed memo, the classified memo, over to the court. Otherwise, he's going to say, fuck you, you can't indict Manafort, essentially. It's illegal for you to do that. It's too expansive. You're not showing me the memo that says that you're allowed to do this anyway. You know, Rosenstein's basically carte blanche order for Mueller to do whatever the hell he wants to anyone in the whole fucking world. At this point, he can indict people who happen to have Russian origin for buying Facebook ads. That's so far outside of the scope of the initial investigation into the Trump campaign, it's difficult to imagine a scenario in which the memo doesn't say something to the effect of Mueller can do whatever the hell he wants. Leave him alone. He literally can roll up into your driveway, punch you in the neck, drag your trash off, grab your computer, and start looking through it for Trump investigation materials. What T.S. Ellis said, Judge Ellis, is basically that to him it looked like Mueller was simply using the Manafort indictment to get material about Trump in order to impeach him. That is a spectacularly odd comment for a federal judge to make unless things are really, really shifty. Judges tend not to say things along those lines. They keep it very cool and collected, and he would have said something. I imagine if it weren't so fishy, if it weren't so obvious that the Mueller probe at this point has overstepped its legal boundaries, that it no longer experiences any proper regard for our legal system. If it weren't for that, I imagine that T.S. Ellis would have said something like, it seems like the Mueller probe may have gone maybe inadvertently a bit far here with the Manafort indictment, and I request, to review this memo now to make sure that it conforms with things. Instead, he's basically indicating, oh yeah, Mueller is probably just gunning for Trump. This is just an excuse to grab more material. So screw you, I need the memo, otherwise your case is basically cooked. Yeah, that's interesting. And this, by the way, it's not a binding decision, it's just him wanting the memo. This doesn't necessarily mean that after reading the memo he doesn't side with the Mueller probe and say, okay, the indictment is okay. But he's saying that unless I read the memo, it's looking real suspicious. I would say so too. If you look at this probe, the American public was sold the Mueller probe in the first place on the idea that, hey, we think that there's a reasonable degree of confidence among the intel communities. And by the way, none of them ever had proof. They just had a reasonable suspicion of this. This is all they said. We're moderately confident that the Trump campaign colluded in some meaningful way with Russia, that Russia screwed with the elections on behalf of the Trump campaign to some degree. We need to investigate. Congress came forward, told the American people the Reds are under the bed. Commies are here trying to influence our election. They own the President of the United States, is what the Democrats said. That's what we were sold the Mueller probe on. What then does that have anything to do with Manafort laundering money 10 years ago with John Podesta's brother? What the hell does that have to do with the nation of Russia? In any way, not even with Russia in the last election, let alone that. No, I mean Russia in general. Russia's not even mentioned. They're talking about a Ukrainian firm. Ukraine, oh, you mean that country that's constantly at odds with Russia? They have like a miniaturized civil war between pro and anti-Russian elements? Oh, the ones that just, lost control a couple of years ago of Crimea, a chunk of their territory, to Russia? To the point where NATO almost got involved? Oh, that nation? Okay, it's the same as Russia. And they're hoping the average American can't find Ukraine on a map. That's essentially what it boils. They're hoping that we're dumb. The whole probe is based on the hope that the American people are basically morons. That we won't notice that at some point, because Trump happens to be the president now, that looking into the last 20 fucking years of his business dealings and the business dealings of anyone associated with him is under the proper purview of a proper warrant. That a warrant should and can be issued for something that expansive. That is a witch hunt. It is a classical definition of a witch hunt. They're not going on suspicion of wrongdoing. That's what they sold it to the public on. But look how wide they're casting the net. If they actually had suspicion that Trump was involved, at some degree, or people very close to him, with colluding with Russia to influence the election in some meaningful way, they wouldn't need to look into 10-year-old money laundering claims. They wouldn't be going after Flynn. Who would care about Flynn talking to Erdogan or talking to the Russians thereafter? Which, by the way, again, it postdates the election. Who cares? As he wasn't working with Trump at the time, I believe. I think he's fighting it now. He's switched. Originally, he's like, "Oh yeah, I'll talk. Yeah, I did wrong, but I don't want charges against me, so give me immunity. I'll talk about these other things." Now he's gone back on that, and he said, "No, screw you. I'm not talking at all." Manafort's fighting it, and it looks like he's got a federal judge on his side. There's a pretty good indicator. There's a high degree of likelihood that unless the memo is real juicy, and a Reagan-era judge decides to stand with what has become basically a corrupted, democratically partisan so-called probe, it's gone it's gone 3 or 4 steps beyond where it ever should have gone. Unless that ends up happening, I think he ends up throwing out the indictment saying, nope, it's not part of your probe. This will have to be handled separately by, a different office. We're going to have to handle this in the state in which it happened, in a normal criminal proceeding. Mueller can't touch it. Mueller can't talk to Manafort. Mueller can't raid Manafort. Mueller can't use evidence garnered from his investigation into Manafort. Well, yeah, that's basically the end of the Mueller probe now, isn't it? What else does he have? Flynn, again, loosely at the time even connected with Trump. He talked improperly to the Russians. A bunch of Russians bought Facebook ads, with Kremlin money. Okay, that's called par for the course, dude. That happens in every election in the world. If Russia wants to influence it, yeah, it's going to dick around a little bit. We do the same thing. The Air Force has 12,000 Facebook sock accounts. This was widely reported on a decade ago. They built an army of sock accounts in order to influence public discourse and give a positive image of the United States by upvoting things that were convenient and downvoting things that weren't, mass reporting and leaving bot comments. We run armies of bot accounts in the United States that dwarf anything that Russia's capable of fielding. And you're telling me that a handful of Facebook ads that could have swayed maybe a couple dozen votes tops in one fucking state for a short one period of time could have influenced our election? You flipping any of those competitive states wouldn't have even flipped the election. What are you talking about? And what does that have to do with the Trump campaign? He's not going over and talking to Russian troll farms. Oh yeah, guys, I'll give you a signed Ivansky portrait here. Ivansky Trump, if you troll for me for the next week, it'd be wonderful. It's not going to happen. No, federal judge Ellis hopefully ends up basically imploding the entire probe. It'd be the best thing we could have in this country if that were to happen. I'll tell you why. This has become a drag on the whole political system that was already difficult to maneuver and was already obstructed. It's about as obstructed as someone who has eaten nothing but fat for the last week, can't even pass a turd, doesn't drink water, just constipated all to hell, can't even move, just constantly racked with pain. Gonna have to go to the emergency room to have a giant impacted fecal nugget removed from their asshole. That's basically how our government was before this probe. Now the executive branch is hamstrung, essentially. Trump can't do anything. Now there are people who say it's a good thing. I disagree. I think it's meaningful when the government can do something. I think it would be wonderful if Trump could actually maneuver like a normal politician and not be treated like a pariah because he happened to hire Manafort. It was apparently, seems to be, according to this federal judge, improper. By the way, this isn't a Trump-appointed judge. This is a Reagan appointee. Trump being, Reagan-esque, I suppose, in some ways, but ultimately being a business Democrat. If this were a Bush-era judge, it would be a problem. If it were an Obama-era judge, people would blow a fucking gasket, and implode the Democratic Party right away. They'll probably boil it down to partisan bicker. It's just like the House Intel Committee that found no evidence of collusion. It's because they didn't look into it enough. Yeah, so essentially you want to investigate. You're doing what Mueller wants to do, according to, it seems, Ellis. You just want to investigate perpetually in hopes of finding something. But here's the thing. You go into a room and you're searching for your lost keys. Now, if the keys are there, it can take a very long time to find them. But if they're not there, it can take forever. You'll still think, well, the keys must be in this room. No, I could have sworn they're there. You will never find them because they don't exist. Within that room, there are no keys for you to find. If Trump didn't collude with Russia, if no higher-ups within his campaign directly colluded with Russia, Mueller can investigate for 1,000,000 years. You will never find evidence of it, not because he's good at covering it up, not because of a corrupt probe, not because the Intel Committee was biased, but because there's no collusion to find. People need to understand that. That's about all. Peace out.